Chapter 1, The House on Hollow Ridge. The house sat like a malignant growth atop Hollow Ridge, its silhouette jagged against the dusky sky. It had been abandoned for decades, or so the townsfolk said. Local lore claimed that anyone who dared cross its threshold vanished, their screams carried away by the wind that howled incessantly through its gaping windows. To Callum Reeves, the house was a puzzle, a challenge. A budding journalist, he thrived on unraveling the mysteries that others avoided. When he stumbled upon a yellowed photograph of the house in the archives of the Stonebridge Chronicle, alongside a cryptic note scrawled in ink, "Dig deep, but not too deep," his curiosity was ignited. He gathered his tools, a flashlight, a camera, and a notebook, and set off just before dusk. By the time he reached the ridge, night was stretching its dark fingers over the landscape. The house loomed before him, its weathered boards creaking under the relentless assault of the wind. Callum stepped through the crooked gate, his boots crunching on a path overgrown with weeds. The air seemed colder here, as though the house exhaled a chill. Pushing open the warped front door, he was greeted by the smell of decay and damp wood. The interior was a maze of shadows. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, painting the walls with streaks of silver. Callum's flashlight swept over a toppled chair, a fireplace choked with ash, and an old clock frozen at 3:15. A faint sound, a whisper, drifted from upstairs. He froze. "Hello?" His voice echoed, small and vulnerable. The whisper came again, clearer this time. It wasn't words but a soft, rhythmic chant, like a lullaby sung through clenched teeth. Against his better judgment, Callum climbed the stairs, each creak of the steps amplifying the pounding of his heart. At the top, he found a room that seemed untouched by time. A child's room, with faded wallpaper depicting cheerful animals. A small bed stood in the corner, its sheets rumpled as if someone had just climbed out. And there, on the wall, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, "Leave her where she lies." Chapter 2, The Shallow Grave. Callum didn't leave. The message only deepened his resolve. Who was her? What happened here? He spent the next few hours scouring the house, photographing every detail. The attic yielded an old trunk filled with dusty toys, a faded journal, and a rusted shovel. The journal belonged to a child named Elsie Granger. Most of the entries were mundane, recounting days of playing in the garden and reading by the fire. But the last few pages grew darker, the handwriting frantic. "She talks to me through the floor. She says she's cold and lonely. I told Mama, but she said I was imagining things. She's wrong. I can hear her crying at night." A cold sweat broke out on Callum's neck. The floor? His flashlight swept the room until it landed on a section of the living room that seemed different, discolored, as if hastily scrubbed. He grabbed the shovel from the attic and began to dig. The wood gave way with surprising ease, and beneath it lay soft earth. He dug feverishly, dirt flying in all directions, until his shovel struck something solid. A small chest, bound with rusted metal, emerged from the ground. It was unnervingly light. Callum pried it open, his hands trembling. Inside was a single item, a doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, its eyes unnervingly lifelike. He picked it up, and as he did, the wind outside seemed to die, leaving an oppressive silence. Then came the laughter. High-pitched and childlike, it echoed around the room. The doll's head turned in his hand, its painted lips parting to whisper, "You shouldn't have done that." Chapter 3, The Return. Callum fled the house, the doll tucked under his arm despite his better judgment. He needed answers, and the doll felt like the key. Back in his small apartment, he placed it on his desk and stared at it under the harsh glare of his desk lamp. It stared back. Hours passed as he scoured records about the Granger family. The house had belonged to them in the 1940s. Elsie, the youngest daughter, had disappeared at the age of 10. Her body was never found, and her parents abandoned the house shortly after. As he worked, strange things began to happen. The temperature in the room plummeted, and his breath fogged the air. Objects shifted when he wasn't looking, a pen rolling off the desk, a chair scraping slightly across the floor. Then came the whispers. At first, he thought they were in his head, but soon they grew louder, distinct. Find her. Find her. The doll's glassy eyes seemed to follow him. Its cracked lips moved silently, forming words he couldn't hear. Desperate, Callum grabbed it and hurled it into the closet, slamming the door shut. But the whispers didn't stop. Chapter 4, The Revelation. Callum returned to the house the next day, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain. He brought the doll, its presence now feeling less like a threat and more like a guide. The house welcomed him this time. The air inside was warm, the shadows less oppressive. The doll's head tilted slightly in his hand, directing his gaze to the fireplace. Reluctantly, he began to search. Behind the bricks, he found another journal, this one belonging to Elsie's mother. The entries painted a grim picture. Elsie had been a peculiar child, prone to talking to invisible friends. One day, she claimed to have made a new friend, a girl who lived under the ground. She begged me to help her, to let her out. I told Elsie to stop this nonsense, but the scratching sounds began that night. My husband heard them too. We tried to ignore it, but then Elsie disappeared. She's still here, somewhere under the floor, and now I can hear her crying too. Callum's stomach churned. The whispers around him grew louder, more insistent. He dropped to his knees and began digging at the base of the fireplace. And then he found her. Chapter 5, Beneath the Hearth. The skeleton was small, curled into a fetal position, and wrapped in a decayed blanket. Callum's flashlight caught the glint of something around her neck, a locket. Inside was a photograph of Elsie and a woman who could only be her mother. The house began to groan, its walls trembling. Dust rained from the ceiling as the whispers turned into anguished screams. The doll in Callum's bag began to move, its muffled voice chanting, "You found her, now set her free." With trembling hands, he lifted the remains and carried them outside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the house seemed to sigh, its oppressive presence lifting. He dug a proper grave in the garden and laid the bones to rest. As he placed the last shovelful of dirt, the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint, melodic laughter. He turned to see the doll lying at the edge of the grave, its eyes closed for the first time. The next morning, the house on Hollow Ridge was gone, leaving only an empty lot. But Callum couldn't forget the final words he heard as he walked away. "Thank you. But she's not alone."